Stand up, all of you. Present posters. Come on, don't be bashful. Assuming the organizers are okay with my presentation and invite me back next year, I hope to see twice as many posters, okay? Because this is what you guys really need to learn to do. And in fact, all the research I'm going to be showing you today, all the graphics and all these studies, I could not have done without my students, okay? And this is from first year students all the way through to graduate students. And so this is a really fundamental, important part of your education. So I hope to see a lot more of you doing this when we come back next year. Okay, so my talk today, I'm going to be focusing on wetlands and how they're really great natural systems. But before I do, I want to let you know that this is not the first time I've been to your beautiful country. This is my second time here. My first time, I came on a surf trip and it was awesome. I had a wonderful time, visited both the East and West Coast, and I'm especially impressed with the ability of your guys to fix surfboards, because here's my compadre who broke his board at Mazata, and in 2 days, back at La Libertad, one of the guys in the surfboard shop there was able to put that board back together, and my buddy Ron is still riding that board today. This was about 6 years ago. Excellent being repaired. Now, on to the real stuff. So here's how I'm going to organize my presentation. First, we're going to talk a little bit about water issues in LA, Los Angeles. And it's very important, so I want to kind of give you a little bit of a background on the kinds of issues we're dealing with, mainly the source of our fresh water and runoff, contaminated runoff from our urban system. Second of all, ecosystem services. Now, Dr. Carmona talked to you a lot about ecosystem services yesterday. They're really vital. As soon as we can bring back more of our urban ecosystems, the better off we are, because they provide so many valuable services. And then we're going to talk about some of the main studies we've done in the biome wetlands that Stephanie just told you about. We'll move on to what I think you'll be very interested in this project. It's what we call a rain garden. And it's actually how we take this contaminated runoff, run it into an engineered garden with native plants, so that not only do you get water soaking down into the ground to add to the water table, water's precious. You need more water, but it also becomes decontaminated because of soil microorganisms and other processes that will remove that pollution. Then I'm going to take you to China, okay? China's doing some really interesting things. China has some huge environmental issues, but they're also doing some really marvelous things to start to overcome some of these environmental problems that they're facing. I'm going to show you what they call the living water garden. And this is something that you can do right here anytime. And then finally, I want to talk to you a little bit about how we work with our students. I call it the LMU professor-student relationship. Okay, let's get on with this. Okay, here's our two big issues. Drinking water, runoff. And this is going to get very serious. It already is serious. We're in a drought. Now, Dr. Powell told you a lot about climate change yesterday, and especially about various areas in the world that are going drought conditions, which can get a lot warmer. In Los Angeles, these two are going to be really impacted. Drinking water, all of our water comes from the mountains, essentially. We do have coastal groundwater reserves, and what's going to happen as we get deeper into climate change is that we're going to see less snow melt being delivered to the city of Los Angeles and Southern California in general, because we're just losing more snowpack. We're also going to see probably stronger storms. That translates into more runoff. And I'll show you a slide showing how much storm activity we do get and how many millimeters per year that we get, which is a lot less than what happens here in El Salvador. Also, when we get the rising sea levels, we do rely on coastal groundwater reserves to help bolster the water that we import in from the mountains. And so as the sea levels rise, you're going to get saltwater intrusion into those coastal groundwater reserves. That's another issue that we have to deal with. On the other side, runoff. More storms means more runoff. And that runoff does pick up a lot of pollutants in our urban landscapes. And where do they go? They go straight out to the ocean. Los Angeles has 2 systems of pipes in the ground. We have one for sewage, that goes to the sewage treatment plants. And we have a second one that collects runoff and gets it out into the ocean. But that's a lot of very good water that we really could use for drinking. So it's a little complicated about our water situation. So bear with me on this graphic. But essentially what happens is, here's our main freshwater reserves. We have rain coming in that will help our local groundwater reserves. And we import a lot of water, probably the majority of our water from the mountains, mainly the Sierra Madres and also the Rocky Mountains. And that's coming up through a Colorado River water. So that comes in, it's this big arrow here. Where's my pointer here? Well, you can see it, there's the big arrow. There we go. Okay, then it comes in and it goes in for domestic uses like oil refineries and what have you, commercial uses, industrial, or domestic, I mean it's like all your homes, so your showers, sinks, toilets, and all that. Then some of that water is used for irrigation, so for outdoor use. A little bit of it will go back into the ground for local groundwater, but a lot of it goes into runoff, into the streets. This big arrow is going from all of this to our sewer plants. Okay, so we have some pretty large sewer plants. The main one for the city of Los Angeles is very close to Loyola Marymount University. It's a big Hyperion sewage treatment plant. I don't know the conversion factor, but it's about 250 million gallons a day. So just probably about almost 1,000 million liters a day. That's a lot of sewage. Okay, it gets treated for that plant. And most of that goes out to the ocean. That's good water. That's not recycled. So what we're doing now, and when it rains, most of that water goes straight out into the ocean. So when they built this whole big runoff system back in the 1930s, the whole idea was to get water off of the city landscapes into the ocean to protect property. So that's what the thinking was back in those days. These days, we're now into recycling, and that's extremely important for this whole thing. So one big recycled stream is the water produced for our sewage treatment plants like Hyperion. It goes off to other plants, what are called the drinking water plants or recycling plants, so they'll clean it even more than Hyperion. And then that water can go back into the groundwater where they spread it. It could also be recycled for irrigating vegetation, landscape. In fact, all the water in LMU then is recycled, is being used as recycled water for all the landscaping at LMU. I love telling my students that you get up in the morning and you do your business, okay? And then you flush those toilets. Maybe tomorrow you could say, hey, how do you do, man? Buenos dias. There's my stuff that I put out there. It's just in the form of pure water that's being used as an irrigation on those shrubs outside your dorm. Okay? It's kind of fun to take students first to the Hyperion plant, so that's step one, then to the West Basin Water District plant, that's step two. And then, which is really great, they can actually take water, we've got the technology, that they can clean it to the point where it's pure H2O. And in fact, you have to put some mineral back into it, because if you only drank pure H2O, you'd actually start leaching minerals out of your body. So at the end of the tour, at the beginning of the tour, I asked students, who would drink this water that's coming from poo-poo water? And would you guys drink this water? Hands up, who would drink recycled poo-poo water? Oh, come on, man. Oh, what? Fernando. Well, he better raise his hand. This is one of my students here, okay? Okay, so by the end of the tour, they see all the steps used to actually purify this water to the point where it's pure H2O. And it's also hot and they're thirsty because it's a big plant. And they'll say, oh, just give it to me. I don't drink anything at this point. And they drink the water and they go, hey, this is not bad, okay? We could make that cleaner water. But it's that public perception, toilet to tap. So we got to get over that. But water is so precious now that it is going to be one of the main things will be right here. In fact, this arrow could actually go straight in down the road into putting it straight into delivery systems to homes. Okay, once you have the safeguards in place and the proper health regulations. So getting these recycle streams is very important. Okay, and the reason why is we need more fresh water. Okay, we need to augment our groundwater supplies. So we take that recycled water, let it percolate into these what they call spreading grounds. And we also, by having more water being recycled, less water is going into the ocean, Santa Monica Bay. That's important because that's less nutrients and things like that into the ocean. So we've got to make sure we try to recycle a lot more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a lot about this aspect right here, biofiltration. Okay, that's one way to take this runoff and now get it into the ground, and you're doing two things. You're replenishing your groundwater supply, but also you are purifying that water, and you're not allowing a lot of contaminants to go into the ocean in doing so. And also in doing so, if you use the proper systems, natural systems like wetlands, constructed wetlands, rain gardens and things, you're also enhancing biodiversity, and now you're providing a lot more ecosystem services to the community. So a little bit about our storms and runoff in Los Angeles area here. Okay, this graph, okay, here's the Los Angeles Basin, a number of watersheds here. The main one, we've got a couple different watersheds here. Here's the Los Angeles River, and so it extends all through this area here. And then here's another watershed right here, the Biona Creek watershed, that we'll be talking more of later on. So we have maybe, literally, we have maybe a dozen really good storms each rain season. That's it, about a dozen. We're just about ready to enter our rain season now, about, really about the end of October, November, through about March. Sometimes in the summertime, we can get some tropical low pressure systems coming up from hurricanes and tropical depressions that break up off of Mexico. Then they come up to the Baja Norte and up into the Southern California area. That's kind of rare, but we do get it. But most our main storms are coming from big low pressure systems in the North Pacific. And we will get pretty reasonable rainfall out of those. As you can see here, it's about 15 inches a year, okay, 381 millimeters a year. I think I was saying 40 to some of my people I was talking to. I made a mistake, it's about 300. But still, it's a lot less than what you guys get here in El Salvador. So it's still not much. We've had many dry years in a row. We thought we were going to have a good wet year last season because of El Nino. You guys all know about El Ninos? Okay? It didn't happen in Southern California. All rainstorms went ashore up about San Francisco on north because we had warm water all up and down the west coast of the United States. Every El Nino is different. This one was different. We got lots of big waves, which is great for surfing. Warm water, which I like being in because no heavy wetsuit, but no rain, no bueno. And then when the rain does come, it does come down in bucketfuls. And this is Biona Creek here. This is right opposite my study area that we'll talk about in a little bit. And this is a typical dry day. And then, as you can see, it's about 0.4 cubic meters per second is the flow of water during a typical dry day, dry season day. Then it rains. So there's a little mark over here, okay? Here's that same mark. And this creek is now roaring down. And if one of my students, unfortunately, had the misadventure of falling in while sampling, I'd have to hop in my car and race down to the mouth of this because it'd be out to the ocean in no time at all. So it would be a wild ride, and I would have many forms to fill out in that accident. So, you guys still want to volunteer for my work? Don't fall in if you do. Well, let me go back to this one. So the main pollutants in the Biota Creek runoff system, now this is coming off the main area of the city of Los Angeles and the pretty large watershed. The main pollutants are fecal indicator bacteria that I'm going to be focusing on for the majority of this presentation. Some pesticides, things left over, DDT, PCBs from the old days, good old days. These things called PAHs, which are the products of the combustion of various compounds like fuels and things. And also metals, zinc, copper, lead, selenium. And finally, trash. Trash is a very important pollutant. And that's one of the main ones that we're working to try to completely reduce in not only Biota Creek, but also the Los Angeles River. So, the systems I'm going to really talk about today are called low impact development systems. And they could be natural, they could be engineered. Most of these are engineered. They can range from very large systems to very small ones. And the whole idea is to get that water, that contaminated runoff, back into the ground and let nature take over. Let nature do the work. That's what it's been evolving for millions of years to do, and it does a really good job. And these LID, I call them LID for short. Okay, they can be used for both dry and wet weather flows. A lot of people think, why do we have to worry if it's not raining? Well, there's a lot of runoff when it's not raining because people are out there, they're watering lawns. You've got large parks that are being watered. And if you don't have a really good system, this will run off into the hardscape. It'll run off into the streets and down into the storm drains. So instead, we would like to redirect these into these sort of these vegetated biofiltration systems. And then if we do it the right way, we can start building back our ecosystem. In this case, our urban ecosystems. I often ask kids, I go, hey, if you want to see nature, where would you go look for nature? They go, oh, I would go off to the Sierra Madre Mountains. Or I would go off to this really desolate islands and see these beautiful coral reefs and stuff. I go, well, you ought to walk out into your own backyard. That's nature. That's an urban ecosystem. Some of my surfing buddies, it's probably inside their house too. They got a lot of nature going on, but we won't go there, okay? So, the particular, for our biofiltration systems, the ones we'll be focusing on, and Stephanie actually mentioned this in her talk, and Victor certainly touched upon his presentation yesterday, but you can see here, the systems that we're looking at here, we can get fresh water, flood protection, water purification, and something that a lot of people don't think about when they think about the value of natural systems would be the cultural, aesthetic, spiritual, educational. I mean, who would not like to walk through a beautiful parkland with natural vegetation? I've been walking all around your campus today, and it is exquisite. I love looking at all the variety of your tropical vegetation and plants. And Dr. Carmona over there is like a walking encyclopedia of these things. I mean, the guy's a little, because he let these ants bite and demonstrate that these things bite, but they don't sting. That's going too far, Victor. But my hat's off to you. So these are the sorts of cultural things that are real valuable in bringing back our urban ecosystems. And this can happen in plots of land no bigger than this little section of the theater here, all the way to pretty extensive systems like I've been working in. Just an example of a couple of these. Here's a rain garden, or they call it a green street, where instead of just having like asphalt here or concrete, you actually dig it out, you replace maybe the native soils with a more permeable type of soil, an engineered soil, so that you get better drainage. And then you plant it with the proper native plants so that when it's raining, water will channel into here and then sink down into the ground. So that way, those pollutants will not be running into the ocean, and you will start to recharge the groundwater beneath this soils here. This is a more extensive system here. This is what I'm going to be talking about in just a little bit. And this runs for nearly 300 meters. It's about 6 to 10 feet wide, and this is Bionic Creek here. And right above it is a whole bunch of commercial and light industrial parking lots and structures. So when it rains, what used to, before they built this about 5 years ago, we used to get some very contaminated runoff going into the Bionic Creek straight out to Santa Monica Bay. But now it's intercepted. And I'll be showing you some data that we've been finding out last winter about this system. And I believe Fernando had a poster out there talking about how we do some of these things. And then we're going to be doing the same thing this winter. And then this is probably one of the biggest projects in the region. This is an artificial or constructed wetland. Now, Stephanie was telling you about the Bino wetlands right in here, but right in here, and this little wiggly thing there, is what we call a constructed wetland and a riparian corridor. So this riparian, this is a huge development here called Playa Vista. All the runoff from the streets in this development goes into this, it actually used to be an old stream bed, but they actually engineered it so that all the runoff goes in there and it's planted with what we call riparian or stream bank vegetation. It goes underneath this large street here, and then it goes into this whole area here, and eventually flows across here, underground through the wetlands, and then into the Biona estuary. And this is the pictures of that artificial wetland right here. And it's full of huge grass reeds, with beautiful vegetation, and we have, I think the birds are counted over 200 species of birds there. And we brought back birds we haven't seen in this area in decades that have come back there. So it's a beautiful area to walk around. So here's the Bionic Creek watershed. And Stephanie already gave you a few facts about that. Mostly developed. And she also showed you a very similar slide to this. But what I'm going to be focusing on are the two areas. First, we're going to talk some more about the Bino wetlands, right here. And just once again, this is all Santa Monica Bay out here. And during the tides, the Bino wetlands is a saltwater wetland, saltwater marsh system. So during high tides, the water flows up the estuary, and it'll go in all the way up to about this point here, and it goes into the estuary. But also we've got fresh water coming down from Biona Creek that mixes in that estuary, and it flows into the wetlands. And that's what Stephanie was looking at. So first we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about those rain gardens, that big rain garden that's right up here in Culver City. So one of the pollutants we're really looking at are fecal indicator bacteria. I call them FIB, F-I-B for short. Now, these bacteria are very common in the guts of warm-blooded organisms. Most of them are harmless. Okay, most of E. coli is harmless. There's a couple of stereotypes that can cause severe illness if they contaminate things like ground beef, spinach, and things like that. Okay, but for the most part, these are harmless bacteria, but they're very prevalent in the guts of warm-blooded organisms. So if you find high counts of these in the water bodies, you can assume that you have fecal, some sort of fecal contamination. The bad news is that contamination is coming from other things other than human. So you'd have to go to more specific tests to see if there are actually human pathogens in. But most wastewater treatment facilities, environmental testing labs, don't go for these guys. They go for E. coli, they go for enterococci. They're relatively easy to measure. So that's why they're usually written into bathing water, drinking water standards. Because you can quickly measure them, you can quickly get results. So this is what we've been looking at in our studies. So the main questions we're looking at is we know these things are going into minor wetlands, so we're very interested in what happens when contaminated water runoff gets into the wetlands. You've got levels of these bacteria in there. What happens? Do they die in the wetlands? Do the wetlands generate more? You have a lot of birds working in there, you've got other processes going on, and are they contributing more into that adjacent estuary, eventually going out to the beaches where people were swimming in Santa Monica Bay? So we didn't know this, so we started these studies, and the very initial studies was we only measured the concentration. Okay, so we go take water samples, bring them to the lab, measure it, and it looked like we had a bit more going in than coming out. Okay, so we had to do deeper questioning. We now had to say, how do they change with these flows between high tide and low tide, and what's the load? So now we had to start measuring not only concentration, which is pretty easy to do, but how much was in a parcel of water, the load. So again, this is all a tidally driven system, and a lot of our studies were done during spring tides. So spring tides happen when you've got the sun, moon, and earth in a straight line. They're perfectly aligned, happens twice a month, and so you get your highest tide and your lowest tides. When they're sort of in a quarter-like position, that's called a neap tide, okay? So there's not a lot of change between the high and the low tides. So like Stephanie pointed out, in our part of the world, we have 2 high tides and 2 low tides. So usually we went out, we'd want to sample during the spring tide. We'd always kind of go out during low tide, this is the ebb tide, and high tide. So you can see these channels really fill all the way up. On me, if I go in the middle of that channel, I'm about up to here, okay? It's always kind of interesting when I send a student out to collect water from the middle of the channel. Always, hopefully there's a tall one in the class. If not, they're like submerged. But they give them a snorkel, they all pull straws to see who has to go out there and swim out and get something. And then we sample, so we sample at low tide, and then we also sample at high tide. So it'll be conditioned like that. So our first set of studies is we're very interested in the question, what happens to the loads of these bacteria? So we have to measure the speed, the water flow going, the tidal flow going in during the flood, and then leaving during the ebb tide. And then how do they change throughout the day? And so throughout a full tidal cycle. So we actually had a 24-hour study. And so we went out there, and for every hour and a half, we would collect a set of samples, 3 samples. And we'd also measure the current speeds. So then that way we have flow times concentration, and that would give us loading. That's a really intensive study. Took a lot of students, and we actually sat there overnight doing this, obviously, but we got some pretty interesting data. And what that showed was that as the water floods in, and we timed it so that we caught the tide flooding in the early mornings, so it would sit for about 6 hours in the sunlight, and then it would flow out, because we knew that sunlight, UV radiation, is a good way to kill off bacteria. So in this study here, during the early morning hours, the water flows in, you can see very high counts of these 3 bacterial groups, total coliforms, Escherichia coli, E. coli, and Prococci. These are the ones that California uses for bathing water standards. So they're pretty high, okay? They start to taper off a little bit. Okay, here's the high-low tide. Then it goes up to the high-high tide. Now they're really starting to drop. Then we get a spike right here. And so that's where the ebb tide really drops. But we get this spike, and we've seen that in other studies. And what's happening is, when you get that really low tide, there's hardly any water in the channel, but the tidal flow is enough that it's suspended